Am I gonna keep this head on the whole time? No, I'm not. I'm gonna take it off. Tom Brady is a really awesome athlete. There's really no getting around that. And one thing that he's talked a lot about as being really beneficial for him has been his TB12 method. So he has a whole book on this, and his method seems to have been really working for him. But is it something that everybody should be doing? Will it help you lose weight or achieve your goals of whatever it is that you're trying to do? I'm gonna be going over all that in today's video. Okay, if you don't know who I am, my name's Autumn. I'm a certified clinical nutritionist, and my passion is to help you achieve your wellness dreams through holistic and science-backed methods. Now, I remember first hearing about the TB12 method, I think it was a few years ago when he first came out with the book. Wasn't it like really expensive when he first came out with the book? I don't know. I got it from my library recently and I was able to read through it, and there are actually some things that I agree with in here and some that maybe not so much. So something that I first found really interesting when I was reading through the book as a former athlete myself is how Tom Brady is on this mission to help other athletes not to go through this whole process of getting injured, getting surgery, repeat. I really respect that. So his whole basis around his diet is really tailored to that pro athlete, somebody who is putting in a lot of wear and tear. Basis of his whole protocol is anti-inflammatory. So some of the rules, like he has a long list of like pillars for what it is that he does for his TB12 method. No processed foods, eat locally, eat organic, not having added sugars or really limiting added sugures, limiting caffeine, and utilizing strategies of food combining. So first things first, here are the things that I actually agree with. So of course, he's emphasizing eating real, organic, local food. You know, I think people don't really understand the importance of why we need to be eating local and organic. Not only because if you're eating non-organic, you're having pesticides, which are not good for our system. And that's a whole video in itself that I want to do in the future as well. In fact, let me know below if you want me to talk about organic versus conventional, and I'll do a video on that. But also local. That means that it didn't have to travel as far to get to you. It's going to retain a higher level of nutrients, which means you get more out of the food that you're eating, which is good. And especially as an athlete, for somebody who has such a high level of nutrition needs, this is especially important because you're utilizing so many systems within the body that you need to have this stream, this high level of minerals and nutrients, micronutrients that can actually help to get the job done. So by eating local and organic, you're actually getting more of those nutrients out of the food. Okay, the next thing he really emphasizes omega-3 fats. This is actually, you know, a good point because there is a study that has found that utilizing omega-3 fatty acids has helped football players to recover more efficiently from concussions. I just want to reiterate, athletes are under a lot of stress. Their body is under a lot of stress, more stress than the average person. Because they are undergoing so much exercise, they need to be able to counter that inflammation. So that means having more anti-inflammatory food. For when it comes to his recommendations, if you do end up reading his book, you understand that this is coming from the perspective of someone who has much higher nutrition needs than the average person. I mean, there are a lot of people in America who definitely could benefit from having more omega-3s in their diet just because we have so many chronic diseases that are based out of an inflammatory condition. But those other inflammatory conditions tend to also arise out of not just not eating enough omega-3s, but also the lifestyle factors as well. So sitting too much or not getting great sleep, things that I've talked about in the past. So just solving a problem with omega-3s, especially for the everyday person, is not the solution. Now, the next thing I really appreciate, he emphasizes having a variety of foods, except for nightshades, which I'll touch on in a second. This is something I wholeheartedly agree with because every food, every vegetable, every herb, every fat, everything that's pretty much edible has something different that it provides. And our bodies need all of these things. So by just sticking to a lot of the same foods, you're actually going to be limiting the amount of micronutrients and macronutrients and that your body is getting. And this could lead to some deficiency. So especially for an athlete, deficiencies is a very bad thing. Even for somebody like me or somebody who's not a pro athlete, still eating a variety of foods is important to help to make it sure that we don't have those imbalances as well. And then of course, he also mentions avoiding refined carbohydrates. I think that pretty much all of us can agree with this. You know, refined carbohydrates are one of the most obvious refined forms of foods, but there's also refined oils, which I talk about in this video with the trans fats. Just in general, avoiding refined foods is always a good thing. Plus, those refined carbs tend to have lower fiber, which means that you're going to have a spike in blood glucose level because that glucose, that sugar is flooding your system, that it will cause a spike in blood glucose level and then an immediate fall. So it leads you to being more hungry and it leads you to having higher insulin levels, just higher inflammation. So in general, processed foods, packaged foods, limiting those as much as humanly possible is ideal. And in this case, especially for an athlete who is already in a state of inflammation, adding further inflammation in from your food sources is just a bad idea. Okay, so now what I don't necessarily agree with. It talks a lot about limiting nightshades. So nightshades are a type of food that categorizes things like tomatoes and eggplants. And the whole idea behind this is that there have been some studies that have found that nightshades can increase inflammation. Now, this never made full sense to me. Some of the longest lived people in the world world rely a lot on having nightshades in their diet. So if these were so detrimental for our inflammatory levels, then how are the longest lived people in the world having these foods and not having high inflammatory levels themselves? It turns out it all comes down to how the food is prepared. A lot of the problems that people attribute to nightshades with the increased inflammation is lectins. So you probably have heard about lectins with Dr. Gundry before. And again, I want to do a whole video just on that. But like I said, the longest lived people are having these nightshades and not having a problem. So when I was studying abroad in Italy, I remember having a basic understanding of how nightshades could cause inflammation. And I remember seeing my teacher, she was like this little old Italian grandma, and she was teaching us how to make all the foods that were traditional for the longest lived people. Just for example, with tomatoes, first they parboil it so that it can remove the outer skin portion, and then they remove the seeds. And that's just always been tradition for these areas, just because they say like it doesn't taste as good with that. Never really for a health reason, but what happens when you do that in this traditional way of making those tomatoes for like a sauce or something, by removing the skin and the seeds, you're removing most of the lectins that cause inflammation in the first place. So by avoiding lectins totally, maybe for an athlete where you are concerned, like where you really have to battle this high inflammatory condition all the time, you can avoid nightshades completely, or you can make them in a way that's lower in these lectins so that it doesn't cause inflammation. But for someone who's just trying to adhere to a healthy diet and to minimize chronic disease, then this may not be something that you need to do, unless you have a sensitivity, which is another matter. Or you could just make it like what the Italians do and parboil it, remove the skin and seeds, and done. So he also mentions snacking is good. Now, if you've seen my video, I believe I have a video on the MMC pathway, but the MMC pathway, it's only triggered by not eating. And so the MMC's job, or the migrating motor complex, its job is to flush out left behind food and bacteria. So snacking actually totally inhibits this process. Any eating in between meals inhibits the MMC. And by inhibiting the MMC, this can lead to bloating and even more severely SIBO. So I don't agree with this statement. Athletes have such different needs than the everyday person, that the everyday person should be eating until satiated so that they have that time between meals where they can flush out that food and the bacteria that's left behind so it doesn't lead to problems like bloating or SIBO. But for an athlete, they do have such higher caloric needs that snacking may be a necessary evil in order to keep up with the demands. So unless you are a pro athlete where you do have these higher demands, I would definitely recommend not adhering to this snacking advice and always just making sure that you eat until fully satiated, which I do have a video on this right here. Okay, so the last thing he really talks about there, I mean, there's a lot I could talk about from his book, is food combining. So this whole idea of combining certain foods is really based off of an Ayurvedic, can't speak, belief, and it's that certain foods shouldn't be eaten at the same time because some foods are digested faster, some are digested slower. Basically, the whole idea is to make it so that you eat certain foods that require the same type of digestion at the same time. So for example, one belief is not having potatoes at the same time as beef or like another protein. Now, when you look at how the body actually digests food, it's actually super smart. It knows how to multitask to make it so that you can digest multiple different types of food at the same time. So like just in the stomach, obviously we know that's a very acidic environment, and that acidic environment is so that it can help convert pepsinogen to pepsin, which helps to break down proteins. And so a lot of protein digestion happens in the stomach. Once it gets to the small intestine, those acids are buffered so that it can be in a more alkaline type of setting so that you can then really get into carbohydrate and fat digestion. So our bodies really know how to multitask. It knows how to handle multiple different types of foods at once. And so this whole process of food combining makes it so it's difficult for somebody to adhere to this type of eating style. And ultimately, that's what I want to point out about the TB12 method. So it was designed for athletes. Athletes have a very specific type of need. For somebody who's trying to lose weight or maybe just like get healthy, this is a really strict type of protocol where it makes it difficult to go out to eat. And it's not necessary for someone who isn't in a super high inflammatory level the way that athletes are. And part of what makes a diet or a lifestyle change successful is how well you can adhere to it. The most clean, amazing diet in the world, if you can't adhere to it, then it's not something that you should be doing. Because also, life is meant to be enjoyed. You don't have to restrict yourself to this extreme. And in fact, I actually watched a really great YouTube video of someone who did the whole TB12 method for a month and explains her experience. And if you want to check that out, I'll make sure to put a link to that video in the description below. All right, guys, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Really helps support my channel. And if you love everything that has to do with nutrition and wellness, then make sure you subscribe. Come out with new videos every Tuesday and Thursday. All right, well, I will see you in the next video. Bye.